This story is entirely fictional. All characters, locations, and events are products of imagination, and any similarity to real people or situations is purely coincidental. The silence in Grace's apartment had become a living thing, thick, suffocating, almost mocking. She sat curled on her worn velvet couch, cradling a mug of chamomile tea that had gone cold an hour ago, while her mother's voice echoed through the phone speaker. "Gracie, sweetheart, you're 32 now. You need to put yourself out there more. Dating apps, church groups, book clubs, anything." Grace closed her eyes. The same conversation, the third time this month. "I know, Mom, I'm trying." But she wasn't. Not really. Because trying meant opening herself up to disappointment again, to awkward first dates with men who talked about themselves for 2 hours straight, to the soul-crushing realization that real connection, the kind that made your heart skip and your breath catch, might just be a myth sold by Hollywood. After hanging up, Grace set her phone face down on the coffee table and stared at the rain streaking down her window. Outside, the Seattle evening was gray and endless, matching the color of her mood perfectly. Then the door burst open.
"Grace Marie Anderson, you will not believe what I just did!"
Cassidy exploded into the apartment like a firework, her auburn hair wild from the wind, her eyes sparkling with a secret so big it practically radiated from her skin. Grace sat up, startled. "Cass, you need to stop using your spare key to... Forget the key." Cassidy kicked off her rain-soaked boots and practically skipped across the hardwood floor. "You have no idea what I just arranged for you." A cold sensation crept up Grace's spine. "What did you do?" Cassidy dropped onto the couch beside her, grabbing both of Grace's hands with an intensity that was equal parts thrilling and terrifying. "I set you up, on a date, tomorrow night." "Absolutely not." Grace tried to pull away, but Cassidy held firm. "Listen to me, this guy, Grace, he's different, I promise you." "That's what you said about the dentist who spent the entire dinner showing me photos of infected gums." "This is nothing like that." Cassidy's voice rose with excitement. "This man he's sophisticated, he's intelligent, Who is he?" Grace demanded, suspicion sharpening her tone. "How do you even know him?" Cassidy's smile turned mysterious, almost secretive. "Can't tell you that." "Then I'm not going." "Grace, no, I'm not going on a blind date with some random stranger you won't even tell me about." Cassidy stood up, pacing now, her mind clearly racing. She turned back, and her expression had softened into something genuine, almost vulnerable. "Do you trust me?" she asked quietly. Grace hesitated. "Of course I do, but..." "Then trust me now. Please." Cassidy knelt in front of her best friend, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I know how much you want real love. I know you've been hurt. But Grace, this could be something special. I feel it." Grace studied her friend's face, searching for any hint of manipulation or misguided matchmaking enthusiasm. Instead, she found only sincerity and hope. "What if it's terrible?" Grace whispered. "Then you leave after appetizers, and I'll buy you ice cream and let you say, 'I told you so,' for the next year." Cassidy squeezed her hands. "But what if it's not? What if this is the moment everything changes?" Grace felt her resistance crumbling like sand beneath a wave. Where is this mysterious date supposed to happen? Cassidy's grin returned, triumphant. "The Emerald Room, tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Wear your best dress, the midnight blue one that makes you look like a goddess." "The Emerald Room?" Grace's voice climbed an octave. "Cass, that place costs more per appetizer than I spend on groceries in a week. Who is this guy?" "Someone who deserves to meet you." Cassidy stood, already heading toward the door, clearly not willing to answer any more questions. "And Grace? He's handsome. Really, really handsome." Before Grace could protest further, Cassidy was gone, leaving only the faint scent of her jasmine perfume and a whirlwind of anxiety in her wake. Grace sat alone again, but the silence felt different now. It buzzed with possibility, with fear, with a tiny spark of hope she was afraid to acknowledge. She picked up her phone and opened her photos, finding the image of the midnight blue dress Cassidy had mentioned. It was beautiful, elegant and confident in a way Grace hadn't felt in years. "This is insane," she muttered to herself. But even as she said it, she was already planning what shoes she'd wear. Grace stood outside the Emerald Room, her heart hammering so violently she wondered if passers-by could hear it. The restaurant's facade was all gleaming glass and soft golden light, the kind of place where celebrities probably ate on Tuesday nights without thinking twice about the bill. She smoothed down her midnight blue dress for the 100th time, suddenly convinced it was too much, or not enough. Her reflection in the glass doors showed a woman who looked far more confident than she felt. Hair swept into a loose updo, minimal jewelry. Lips painted a shade called Dangerous Promise that the saleswoman had insisted was perfect.
Why? You can still leave.
She whispered to herself. Just text Cass, say you're sick, go home and... Reservation for Sullivan? The hostess appeared at her elbow, elegant and professional. Grace's mouth went dry. Yes. Grace Anderson. I'm meeting someone. The hostess's smile brightened. Ah yes, Mr. Sullivan is already seated. Right this way, please. Sullivan. At least now she had a last name. Grace followed the hostess through the restaurant, acutely aware of every eye that might be watching, every step her heels made on the polished marble floor. The interior was even more breathtaking than she'd imagined. Crystal chandeliers, fresh orchids on every table, and a string quartet playing something hauntingly beautiful in the corner. Then she saw him. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He sat at a corner table by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Seattle skyline twinkling behind him like a constellation of earthbound stars. But Grace barely registered the view, because her entire focus had narrowed to the man rising from his seat. Tall, dark hair with just enough wave to make you want to run your fingers through it. A charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent but looked effortless on him. And his eyes, deep brown, warm and fixed entirely on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe.
Grace,
he said, and her name sounded like poetry in his voice. Low, smooth, with the hint of a smile around the edges. Hi, she managed, then immediately wanted to kick herself. Hi? That's all you've got? But he didn't seem to mind. He moved around the table and pulled out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy that should have felt stuffy but instead felt right. I'm Bennett, he said as she sat, and she caught the scent of his cologne, something woodsy and expensive and utterly intoxicating. Bennett Sullivan. And I have to say, Cassidy's description didn't do you justice. Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. Cassidy has a tendency to exaggerate. Not this time. His smile was genuine, reaching his eyes and crinkling the corners in a way that made her stomach flip. Would you like wine? Or are you one of those people who needs to see if I'm a serial killer before accepting a drink? A laugh burst out of her before she could stop it. Surprised, genuine, and completely unguarded. Is that a common first date concern for you? Only when I'm trying to make an impression on someone I actually care about impressing. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. There was no smooth player charm, no rehearsed lines. Just straightforward sincerity that made her relax slightly in her chair. Wine sounds perfect, she said. The next hour unfolded like a dream Grace didn't want to wake from. Bennett ordered a bottle of something French she couldn't pronounce, and they talked. Really talked. Not the usual awkward first date interrogation about jobs and siblings and favorite movies, but real conversation that flowed like water. He told her about growing up in Maine, about his obsession with vintage bookstores and terrible horror movies. She found herself confessing her secret love for baking at midnight and her irrational fear of pigeons. He laughed, a rich, warm sound that made other diners glance over with curious smiles. Pigeons? He repeated, his eyes dancing. Grace, they're harmless. They're rats with wings, and they have those creepy little feet and the way they bob their heads. She shuddered dramatically, and he laughed again. I promise to protect you from any pigeon attacks for the remainder of the evening. My hero, she said dryly, but she was smiling too. The food arrived. Courses Grace didn't remember ordering, but that melted on her tongue like small miracles. But honestly, she barely tasted any of it. She was too focused on Bennett, on the way he listened when she spoke like her words were the most important thing in the world, on the way his hand occasionally brushed hers on the table and sent electric shocks up her arm. Somewhere between the entree and dessert, the conversation shifted. Deeper, more intimate. Can I ask you something? Bennett's voice had gone quieter, more serious. Of course. Why did you agree to this? Cassidy told me you don't really do blind dates. Grace considered lying, giving some breezy answer about wanting to try new things. But something about Bennett made her want to be honest, even when honesty felt vulnerable. I was lonely, she said simply. Not just alone, but lonely. The kind that sits in your chest and makes everything feel gray. Cassidy saw that, I think, and she's been trying to fix it for months. Bennett nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. I know that feeling, that particular shade of gray. You? Grace couldn't hide her surprise. But you seem so put together, confident. He smiled, but it was tinged with something sad. That's the funny thing about loneliness. It doesn't care how successful you are or what you have. It just sits there. Their eyes locked across the table, and Grace felt something shift between them. Some invisible wall crumbling, some door opening. I'm glad Cassidy is a meddling busybody, she whispered. I'm glad you wore that dress. The air between them felt charged, electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. Grace couldn't look away from his face, from his eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Bennett pushed back his chair and stood, coming around to her side of the table. He extended his hand. Dance with me. There's no dance floor, Grace pointed out, even as she placed her hand in his. Then we'll make one. He led her to a small space near their table, where the string quartet's music drifted over them like silk. His arm slid around her waist, her hand found his shoulder, and they began to sway. Grace had danced before. Awkward middle school slow dances, tipsy wedding receptions, forced choreography at her cousin's Zumba class. But this was different. This was two bodies finding a rhythm that seemed to exist only for them, moving together as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. Grace, Bennett murmured, his lips close to her ear. I'm going to kiss you now. If you don't want me to, you should probably tell me. Her breath caught. Every logical thought in her brain screamed that this was too fast, too soon, too intense for a first date. But her heart whispered something else entirely. Don't ask permission, she heard herself say. Just kiss me. He did. Bennett's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her jawline with unbearable gentleness. Then his lips met hers and the entire restaurant disappeared. There was no string quartet, no other diners, no Seattle skyline. Just his mouth on hers, warm and sure and absolutely perfect. The kiss was slow, deliberate, like he was savoring every second. Grace's hand slid up his chest to his shoulders, then into his hair, and she heard him make a low sound in the back of his throat that sent shivers down her spine. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace felt like she'd been struck by lightning. That was, she started, but couldn't find words. Yeah, Bennett agreed, his forehead resting against hers. It was. They stood there, swaying slightly to music Grace could barely hear over the pounding of her own heart, and she knew with absolute certainty that nothing in her life would ever be the same. The kiss had changed everything. When they finally pulled apart, Grace felt dizzy, unmoored, like someone had rewritten the rules of gravity and forgotten to tell her. Bennett's hand was still cradling her face, his thumb making small, absent circles on her cheek that were driving her absolutely insane. His eyes searched hers, dark and intense, and asking a question she wasn't sure she understood yet. Come with me, he said softly. Grace blinked, trying to clear the fog from her brain. What? Leave here. With me. His voice was rough, urgent, I don't want this night to end. Not yet. Every rational thought Grace possessed lined up in her mind like soldiers preparing for battle. This was a first date. She barely knew this man. Good girls didn't leave restaurants with strangers, no matter how perfect those strangers kissed. But then Bennett smiled. Not his polished, charming smile, but something more vulnerable, more real. And all those rational thoughts scattered like dandelion seeds in the wind. Where would we go, she heard herself ask, and knew in that moment she'd already decided. I know a place, somewhere private, somewhere we can just talk, be ourselves without 100 people watching. Grace glanced around and realized he was right. At least a dozen diners were trying very hard to pretend they hadn't just witnessed their kiss, but failing spectacularly. She caught one elderly woman giving her a thumbs up. Okay, Grace whispered. Let's go. Bennett's entire face lit up. He signaled for the check and Grace reached for her purse, but he stopped her with a gentle touch on her wrist. Please, let me. Bennett, this place is worth every penny, he finished, his eyes never leaving hers. Minutes later, they were outside in the cool Seattle night. Bennett's hand found hers naturally, their fingers intertwining like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. He led her down the street to where a sleek black town car waited. You have a driver? Grace couldn't help asking. For tonight, yes. He opened the door for her. I wanted to be able to focus entirely on you, not on navigating traffic. It was such a simple, thoughtful gesture that Grace felt her heart squeeze. She slid into the car's leather interior and Bennett followed, giving the driver an address she didn't catch. As they pulled away from the curb, Grace suddenly felt nervous. Bennett, where exactly are we? He kissed her again, stealing the words right out of her mouth. This kiss was different from the first, hungrier, more desperate, like he'd been holding back before and couldn't anymore. Grace gasped against his lips, and his hand slid into her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace's lipstick was definitely ruined, and she didn't care even a little bit. Sorry, Bennett murmured, though he didn't sound sorry at all. I've been wanting to do that again since the moment we stopped. Don't apologize for that, Grace said, surprised by the huskiness in her own voice. The drive felt both endless and far too short. Grace was hyper-aware of Bennett beside her, his hand on her knee, his thumb making those maddening circles again, the way he looked at her like she was the only thing that existed in his universe. The car finally stopped in front of a high-rise building that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about luxury living. A uniformed doorman rushed to open their door. Good evening, Mr. Sullivan, Ms. Anderson. Grace blinked. How did the doorman know her name? But Bennett was already guiding her inside, past a lobby that looked like a 5-star hotel, into an elevator with actual marble walls. He pressed the button for the top floor. Bennett, Grace said as the elevator climbed. What is this place? A hotel, the penthouse suite. He turned to face her and his expression was almost sheepish. I hope that's okay. I just thought, somewhere comfortable, private, where we could talk without... This must have cost a fortune, Grace interrupted, her practical side finally waking up. Grace. Bennett caught both her hands, holding them between his own. Please don't worry about that. I just want to spend more time with you. That's all. The elevator doors opened directly into the suite, and Grace's jaw literally dropped. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the entire Seattle skyline, lights twinkling like a sea of stars. The space was enormous, a full living room with plush furniture, a dining area, what looked like a full kitchen off to one side. Fresh flowers everywhere, soft jazz playing from invisible speakers. This is insane, Grace whispered. It's just a room, Bennett said, but he was watching her carefully, gauging her reaction. Bennett, normal people don't just book penthouse suites for... Grace stopped, realization dawning. You planned this, before you even met me. He had the grace to look guilty. Cassidy told me about you, about how special you are. I wanted everything to be perfect. If you're uncomfortable, we can leave right now. We can go get coffee. Sit in a park, whatever you want. Grace turned to look at him. Really look at him. There was anxiety in his eyes, fear that he'd overstepped, genuine concern for her comfort. And underneath it all, that same raw honesty that had drawn her to him from the beginning. She should leave. She should call Cassidy, have the driver take her home, chalk this up to a beautiful but ultimately reckless evening. But then Bennett reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and Grace felt something inside her crack wide open. "I don't want to leave," she said quietly. The relief on his face was profound. "You're sure?" Instead of answering, Grace stepped closer and kissed him. This time, she was the one initiating, the one taking control. Her hand slid up his chest, feeling his heart pounding as hard as hers, and she heard his sharp intake of breath. Bennett's arms came around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The kiss deepened, grew heated, and Grace felt herself melting into him like she was made to fit exactly there. "Grace," he murmured against her lips. "You're incredible." She wanted to respond, to say something witty or romantic, but then Bennett was kissing her neck, that sensitive spot just below her ear, and all coherent thought evaporated. Somehow they made it to the couch, though Grace couldn't have said how. Bennett sat down and pulled her onto his lap, and she went willingly, straddling him, her dress riding up her thighs. His hand settled on her waist, burning through the thin fabric. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice rough. "If this is too much, if I'm moving too fast." Grace silenced him with another kiss, pouring every ounce of want and need and surprising certainty into it. When she pulled back, both of them were breathing hard. "I don't want you to stop," she whispered. "I should want you to stop. I should be sensible and careful and all those things I've always been. But Bennett, I've never felt like this before. Never." His eyes darkened. "Neither have I." "Really?" She couldn't hide her skepticism. "A man who books penthouse suites has never met someone who made me forget every rule I've ever had about taking things slow," he interrupted. "Never felt like I'd die if I couldn't touch someone. Never looked at a woman and thought, there she is." Grace's breath caught. "There she is? The one I've been waiting for without knowing I was waiting." Bennett's hand came up to cup her face. "I know how that sounds. Crazy, right? We just met. But Grace, when you walked into that restaurant, I knew. I just knew." Tears pricked at Grace's eyes, but they were good tears. Overwhelming tears. "I knew too," she confessed. "The second I saw you, something just clicked into place." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring each other. Bennett's hands moved up her back, finding the zipper of her dress, and he paused. "Yes or no?" he asked, his forehead pressed to hers. Grace's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Every cautious instinct screamed at her to pump the brakes, to slow down, to be reasonable. But for once in her carefully controlled life, Grace didn't want to be reasonable. "Yes," she whispered. The zipper descended slowly, Bennett's fingers tracing the line of her spine as more skin was revealed. Grace shivered, but not from cold. His eyes never left hers, checking in with every touch, making sure she was still with him. "You're beautiful," he murmured. "So damn beautiful." Grace pulled at his tie, loosening it, then started on the buttons of his shirt. Her hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear. From anticipation. From the intensity of wanting someone so completely it felt like burning from the inside out. When his shirt fell open, revealing a chest that made her mouth go dry, Grace ran her hands over his skin, feeling the rapid beat of his heart under her palms. "Bedroom?" Bennett asked, his voice barely more than a growl. Grace nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He stood, lifting her with him, her legs wrapping around his waist instinctively. He carried her through the suite, kissing her the whole way, until they reached a room dominated by an enormous bed with pristine white sheets. Bennett laid her down gently, reverently, like she was something precious. He stood at the edge of the bed, looking down at her with such raw emotion that Grace felt tears threaten again. "Last chance to change your mind," he said softly. Grace reached up and pulled him down to her. I'm not changing my mind. What followed was the most intense, intimate, earth-shattering experience of Grace's life. Bennett touched her like he was memorizing every inch of her skin, kissed her like he was trying to brand himself into her soul, and Grace gave herself over to it completely, all her walls crumbling, all her defenses gone. They moved together like they'd been designed for each other, finding a rhythm that felt both brand new and ancient as time. When Grace finally shattered in his arms, she cried out his name and heard him answer with hers, and felt something fundamental shift in the universe. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, skin against skin, heartbeats slowly returning to normal. Bennett's hand stroked through her hair while Grace's head rested on his chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heart. Stay, he whispered into the darkness. Stay with me tonight. Grace smiled against his skin. I'm not going anywhere. As she drifted toward sleep, wrapped in Bennett's arms, Grace thought that maybe Cassidy had been right after all. Maybe this was the moment everything changed. Grace woke to golden sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the unfamiliar but utterly perfect sensation of strong arms wrapped around her waist. For a moment she lay perfectly still, afraid that moving would shatter whatever spell had been cast over the last 12 hours. Bennett's chest rose and fell steadily against her back, his breath warm against her shoulder. The sheets were soft as clouds, the room quiet except for the distant hum of the city waking up below them. Grace had never felt so safe, so completely at peace, in her entire life. Then reality started creeping in around the edges. She'd slept with a man she'd met yesterday, a man she barely knew, a man who'd booked a penthouse suite before even meeting her, who had a driver waiting, who'd ordered wine that probably cost more than her car payment without blinking. Who is he? The question that had been buried beneath layers of champagne kisses and shattering pleasure now surfaced with uncomfortable clarity. Grace knew his name was Bennett Sullivan. She knew he grew up in Maine, loved horror movies, and kissed like sin. But what did he actually do? Where did he work? How could he afford all of this? I can hear you thinking. Bennett's sleep-roughened voice murmured against her ear, making her shiver. Your brain is so loud it woke me up. Grace turned in his arms, coming face to face with sleepy brown eyes and tousled dark hair that made him look somehow even more attractive than last night. His hand came up to trace her jawline, a gesture that was already becoming familiar. Good morning, she said softly. The best morning, he corrected, then kissed her, slow and thorough and devastating. When he pulled back, his expression had turned more serious. But you're worried about something. I'm not worried exactly, Grace paused, trying to find the right words. Bennett, I realized last night that I don't actually know much about you. Your job, your life, anything really beyond the fact that you're possibly the most incredible kisser on the planet. He smiled at that, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. What do you want to know? Everything. Start with what you do for a living. Because this, she gestured at the luxurious suite around them, this isn't exactly a teacher's salary. Bennett's expression shifted, something that looked almost like anxiety flickering across his features. He sat up, the sheets pooling around his waist, and ran a hand through his hair. Grace sat up too, suddenly feeling exposed, pulling the sheet up to cover herself. Grace, he began, then stopped, took a breath, started again. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you last night, but I was selfish and didn't want to ruin the moment. Cold dread settled in Grace's stomach. Oh God, you're married. What? No! Bennett looked genuinely horrified. Grace, no! Nothing like that, I promise. Then what? He stood up, pulling on his pants from last night, pacing to the window. Grace watched him, her heart hammering, trying to read his body language. He looked tense, nervous, like he was steeling himself for something difficult. I'm rich, he finally said, still facing the window. Very rich, like millionaire rich. Grace blinked. Of all the confessions she'd been bracing herself for, that hadn't been on the list. What? Bennett turned to face her. I'm the CEO of Sullivan Tech. We design cybersecurity software for corporations. The company went public 3 years ago, and I'm worth—" He hesitated. "A lot. More than I ever wanted or needed." Grace's mind reeled. Sullivan Tech. She'd heard of it. Of course she had. It was one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. Articles about it popped up in her news feed regularly. And Bennett was the CEO? Why didn't you tell me? The question came out sharper than she intended. "Because I wanted you to like me for me," Bennett said, his voice raw with honesty. "Not for what I have or what I can provide. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How exhausting it is to never know if someone wants you or wants access to your bank account?" Grace pulled her knees to her chest, trying to process. "So last night, the restaurant, the suite, all of it, that was just pocket change to you? That's not fair." "Isn't it?" She could hear the edge in her own voice but couldn't stop it. "You let me worry about the cost of dinner. You heard me say the suite must have been expensive and you lied." "I didn't lie. I said don't worry about it." "A lie by omission is still a lie, Bennett." He flinched like she'd slapped him. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Grace felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. "You're right," Bennett finally said, his voice quiet. "You're absolutely right. I should have told you I was a coward, and I'm sorry." Grace looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't standing like a confident CEO anymore. He looked vulnerable, almost broken, like her opinion of him was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Why are you telling me now?" she asked. Bennett moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed but not touching her, respecting her space. "Because I need you to know the truth before I ask you something important." "What could you possibly need to ask me? We've known each other less than 24 hours. I know how crazy this sounds. But Grace—" He reached out, stopping just short of touching her hand. "Last night wasn't just incredible sex for me. It wasn't just a fun date. You're different, special, real in a way that nothing in my life has been real for a very long time. Bennett, let me finish, please." He took a shaky breath. "I'm 35 years old. I've dated dozens of women, beautiful women, intelligent women, women who checked every box on paper, and I felt nothing, absolutely nothing. Then you walked into that restaurant, and it was like someone turned on a light I didn't know had been off." Grace's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear him over the rush of blood in her ears. "I can't let you walk out of here without knowing that I'm all in," Bennett continued. "I don't want to date casually. I don't want to see where this goes. I want—" He stopped, laughed at himself. "God, you're going to think I'm insane. Try me." Bennett looked directly into her eyes, and the intensity there stole her breath. "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them like a shimmering, impossible thing. Grace's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. "I know," Bennett said quickly. "I know it's crazy. I know we just met. I know I sound like a lunatic. But Grace, I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life. You are the person I've been waiting for. You are home. Bennett, you can't just— people don't just—" Grace couldn't form a complete sentence. Her brain felt like it had been unplugged and nothing was processing correctly. "I'm not proposing because of money or security or anything practical," he continued, his words tumbling out in a rush now. "I'm proposing because when I held you last night I felt peace for the first time in my adult life. Because when you laugh, I want to record it and play it on repeat. Because the thought of you walking out that door and out of my life makes me feel like I can't breathe." Tears were streaming down Grace's face now, and she wasn't even sure when they'd started. "This is insane. I know. We barely know each other. I know. What would people say? What would my parents think? What would—" "Grace." Bennett finally closed the distance between them, cupping her face in both hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "Forget everyone else for 1 second. Forget what's logical or reasonable or what people will think. Just tell me. What does your heart say?" Grace closed her eyes, trying to quiet the chaos in her mind and listen to something deeper. And underneath all the fear and shock and disbelief, she felt it, a certainty that defied logic, a knowing that had nothing to do with reason. This was real. This was right. This was the thing she'd been waiting for her whole life, without knowing she was waiting. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Bennett's forehead pressed against hers. "Then just say yes. Say yes, and we'll figure everything else out together. Say yes, and I promise I will spend every single day making sure you never regret it." Grace opened her eyes and found Bennett watching her with such raw hope and vulnerability that it broke something open inside her chest. She thought about her empty apartment, her cold tea and gray silences, the years of careful dating and measured responses and playing it safe, all of which had led precisely nowhere. Then she thought about last night, the way Bennett had looked at her like she hung the moon, the way he'd touched her like she was precious, the way she'd felt more alive in his arms than she had in her entire 32 years. Sometimes safe wasn't the answer. Sometimes you had to take a leap and trust that you'd either fly or someone would catch you. "Ask me again," Grace said, her voice steady now. Bennett pulled back slightly, hope flaring in his eyes. "Grace Anderson, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on this crazy, impossible, absolutely certain thing between us?" Grace took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown water. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." The smile that broke across Bennett's face was like sunrise, brilliant and blinding and beautiful. He kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of promise, and Grace kissed him back, pouring every ounce of terrified hope into it. When they broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "We're completely insane," Grace said. "Absolutely certifiable," Bennett agreed. "When do you want to do this?" Bennett grinned, mischievous now. "How do you feel about next weekend?" Grace's eyes widened. "Next weekend? Bennett, that's 8 days away." "I know. Is it too soon? We can wait if you want. A month, 2 months, whatever you need, but Grace, I've already waited 35 years to find you. I don't want to wait any longer than necessary." Grace thought about all the traditional things she'd always imagined. The long engagement, the carefully planned wedding, the months of preparation. Then she thought about how none of that actually mattered. "Next weekend," she said decisively. "Let's do it." Bennett's whoop of joy was so loud and so genuine that Grace dissolved into laughter. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them dizzy with happiness and terror and the exhilarating rush of falling without a net. As Bennett set her down and kissed her again, Grace realized something profound. She hadn't found security and love in spite of taking a risk. She'd found them because she finally had the courage to leap. The next 8 days passed in a blur of surreal, dizzying happiness that Grace kept expecting to dissolve like morning fog. But every morning she woke up to texts from Bennett, sometimes sweet, sometimes funny, always making her heart skip, and the diamond ring on her finger caught the light, reminding her this was actually happening. She'd called Cassidy immediately after leaving the penthouse that first morning, and her best friend had screamed so loud that Grace had to hold the phone away from her ear. "I knew it! I knew you two would be perfect," Cassidy had shrieked. "Wait, did you say he proposed? After one date?" Technically, it was one date and one morning after, Grace had said, unable to stop smiling. "Grace Marie Anderson, you dark horse. Tell me everything. And I mean everything." Telling her parents had been more complicated. Grace had driven to their house in Tacoma, sat them down in their familiar living room with its worn floral couch and family photos covering every surface, and dropped the bomb. Her mother had gone pale. Her father had stood up, sat down, stood up again. "Sweetheart," her mother had said carefully, "don't you think this is a bit sudden?" "We haven't even met him," her father had added, his protective instincts clearly in overdrive. "What do we know about this man? What does he do? Where does he come from?" "Grace, honey, you've always been so sensible." "I know," Grace had interrupted gently. "I know it seems crazy. Trust me, half my brain is still screaming that this is the most reckless thing I've ever done, But Dad, Mom, when you know, you know. Isn't that what you always told me about how you two met? Her parents had exchanged a look, that married couple telepathy that comes from decades together. We dated for 2 years before your father proposed, her mother had pointed out. And I was 23, not 32, Grace had countered. I've done the sensible thing. I've dated carefully and slowly, and with my head instead of my heart. And you know where it got me? Alone and lonely and convinced that real love was something that only happened in movies. Then I met Bennett, and everything just clicked into place. Her father had softened first. You really love him? I really, really do. And he treats you well? Respects you? Better than I knew I deserved to be treated? Her mother had started crying then. Happy tears, worried tears, all mixed together. Oh, baby, I just want you to be happy. I am, Mom. I promise I am. They'd met Bennett 2 days later over dinner, not at the Emerald Room, but at a cozy Italian place Grace's parents loved. Bennett had been nervous, which Grace found endearing. The powerful CEO reduced to fidgeting with his napkin because he wanted to impress her parents. He'd won them over, of course. Not with his money. He'd been careful not to mention Sullivan Tech or his wealth, but with his genuine love for their daughter. The way he looked at Grace like she hung the moon. The way he listened when she spoke. The way he reached for her hand under the table when he sensed she was anxious. He's a good man. Her father had told her privately as they were leaving. Still think you're both crazy, but he's a good man who loves you. That's what matters. Now standing in front of a full-length mirror in what Bennett had called a small boutique, but what Grace recognized as one of the most exclusive bridal shops in Seattle, she could hardly believe this was her life. The dress was simple but stunning. Ivory silk that draped like water, with delicate lace cap sleeves and a low back that made her feel both elegant and daring. No train, no veil, no elaborate accessories, just her and the dress and the knowledge that in 3 hours she'd be married. You look like a princess, Cassidy said from behind her, eyes shimmering with tears. Grace, you're so beautiful I can't stand it. Grace turned to her best friend, her maid of honor, her co-conspirator, the reason any of this was happening. Thank you. For everything. For pushing me, for setting us up, for... Stop, Cassidy interrupted, dabbing at her eyes. You'll ruin my makeup and yours. Besides, I didn't do anything except introduce 2 people who were already perfect for each other. You did the rest. A knock at the door made both women turn. Grace's mother entered and immediately burst into fresh tears. Mom, you promised you'd hold it together, Grace said, laughing even as her own eyes prickled. I lied. Her mother crossed the room and pulled Grace into a hug. My baby girl, getting married, I can't believe it. Neither can I, honestly. Her mother pulled back, studying Grace's face intently. No doubts, no cold feet? Grace considered the question seriously. There should be doubts, shouldn't there? After knowing Bennett for barely more than a week? But when she searched her heart, all she found was certainty. None, she said firmly. Is that weird? No, sweetheart, it's not weird. Her mother smiled, touching Grace's cheek gently. When I married your father, my mother told me something I've never forgotten. She said, love isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting that you'll figure them out together. You and Bennett, you have that trust. I can see it. A text buzzed on Grace's phone. Bennett, of course. Can't wait to see you. Can't wait to call you my wife. Can't wait for forever. Grace smiled so wide her cheeks hurt. The ceremony was being held at a stunning garden venue just outside the city. Intimate, with only close family and friends. Bennett had offered to plan something huge and elaborate, but Grace had wanted simple, meaningful, just the people who mattered most. As she arrived in the car with her father and Cassidy, Grace's heart hammered with nervous anticipation. The garden was breathtaking. Late afternoon sun filtering through trees. White roses everywhere, string lights already twinkling even though dusk was still hours away. Ready, sweetheart? Her father asked, offering his arm. So ready, Grace breathed. The music started, Not the traditional wedding march, but something softer, more personal. A song Bennett had told her reminded him of her. Grace stepped onto the petal-covered path, her father beside her, and looked up. Bennett stood at the end of the aisle under an arch draped in white flowers, and the expression on his face when he saw her made Grace's breath catch. His eyes were shining with unshed tears, his smile so full of joy and love that she felt it like a physical thing wrapping around her heart. She'd made the right choice. Whatever happened, whoever questioned it, however unconventional their story was, this was right. The ceremony itself passed in a beautiful blur. Grace barely heard the officiant's words, too focused on Bennett's face, on the way his hand trembled slightly when he slipped the ring onto her finger, on the way he choked up when he said his vows. "Grace," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "a week ago, I thought I knew what my life was. Successful, comfortable, predictable. Then you walked into that restaurant and showed me what I'd been missing. Not just love, but magic. Real, imperfect, beautiful magic. I promised to cherish you, to laugh with you, to protect you from pigeons." That got a laugh from the small crowd. "And to love you with everything I have for all the days I'm given. You are my home. You are my heart. You are my Grace." By the time he finished, Grace was openly crying. When it was her turn, she had to take a steadying breath. "Bennett, I've spent most of my life playing it safe, being careful, not taking risks. Then you came along and showed me that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one at all. You saw me, really saw me, in a way no one ever has. And you didn't just see the good parts. You saw all of me, the scared parts and the messy parts, and you chose me anyway. I promise to be your partner, your equal, your soft place to land. I promise to take every crazy adventure with you, and I promise that no matter what life throws at us, we'll face it together. I love you. So much. I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant said, beaming. "You may kiss." Bennett didn't wait for permission. He pulled Grace to him and kissed her deeply, thoroughly, while their guests erupted in cheers and applause. When they broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, Grace felt complete in a way she'd never experienced before. The reception was small, but perfect. Dinner under the stars, toasts that made everyone laugh and cry, dancing to music that seemed chosen just for them. Grace's father gave a speech about how he'd worried his cautious daughter would never take a chance on love, and how grateful he was that she finally had. Cassidy told embarrassing stories about Grace's disastrous dating history that had everyone in stitches. Then Bennett stood up to speak, and the entire garden fell silent. "I'm not great at speeches," he began, his hand finding Grace's automatically. "I'm much better with code and algorithms than with words, but I need you all to know something about the woman I just married." He looked down at Grace, and the love in his eyes was so intense it made her heart ache. "Grace didn't marry me for my money. In fact, when I told her about Sullivan Tech, about what I was worth, she got mad at me for not telling her sooner. She didn't care about the penthouse suite or the expensive dinners or any of it. She just cared about me, the real me, the person underneath all the trappings." He turned back to their guests. "My entire adult life, I've wondered if anyone would ever see me for who I actually am. If anyone would choose me rather than what I could provide. Grace did. She chose me when I was just a man who loved horror movies and was terrified of saying the wrong thing. That's who she said yes to. That's who she married." Bennett squeezed Grace's hand. "So this isn't just a wedding. This is me promising, in front of everyone who matters, that I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that choice, being the man she saw in me when we first met. And I will make sure that every single day she knows she made the right decision." Grace stood up and kissed him, not caring that everyone was watching, not caring that they were supposed to wait for the formal dances. She kissed him like he was oxygen and she'd been drowning, and when they broke apart, she whispered against his lips, "Best decision I ever made." As the evening wore on and the dancing began, Grace found herself wrapped in Bennett's arms, swaying to music under the stars. Around them, their families mingled. Her parents chatting animatedly with Bennett's mother who'd flown in from Maine. Cassidy flirting outrageously with Bennett's best man. Children from both families racing around the dance floor shrieking with laughter. Happy? Bennett murmured against her ear. Deliriously, Grace answered honestly. Although I keep expecting to wake up and find out this was all a dream. Not a dream. Just life, finally getting it right. He pulled back to look at her. I have something to tell you. Grace's heart skipped. Should I be worried? No, the opposite, actually. Bennett smiled, that soft, private smile that was just for her. I've been thinking about what happens next, about our life together, and I want you to know the money, the company, all of it. None of that defines us. You're not Mrs. CEO or Mrs. Millionaire. You're Grace. My Grace. And whatever you want to do with your life, whatever dreams you have, I'm here to support them. Tears pricked at Grace's eyes again. How are you real? Because you made me real, he said simply. Before you, I was just going through the motions. Now I'm alive. Grace leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and realized something profound. She hadn't just gained a husband. She'd gained a partner, an anchor, a home that had nothing to do with walls and everything to do with the man holding her. The money was nice. Of course it was. The security, the comfort, the knowledge that she'd never have to worry about making rent or affording groceries. But that wasn't what she'd said yes to. She'd said yes to late-night conversations and terrible horror movies, and someone who looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever had. She'd said yes to a man who saw her, really, truly saw her, and loved what he found. She'd said yes to love. Real, messy, imperfect, absolutely perfect love. As the night deepened and the stars came out in full force, Grace and Bennett snuck away from the reception, walking hand in hand through the garden. They found a quiet bench tucked away from the party and sat close together, Grace's head on Bennett's shoulder. Thank you, Grace said softly. For what? For being brave enough to book that penthouse before you even met me. For taking a chance on someone you didn't know. For seeing something in me worth fighting for. Bennett kissed the top of her head. I should be thanking you. You said yes when every logical part of your brain probably screamed at you to run. You trusted me. Trusted us. Best leap of faith I ever took. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their families and friends celebrate inside the lit garden, and Grace felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a warm blanket. This was her life now. This incredible, impossible, absolutely certain life. And she couldn't wait to see what came next. 6 months later, Grace stood in the kitchen of their new home, not the sterile penthouse where they'd first made love, but a real house with creaky floors and a garden and neighbors who borrowed sugar, whisking eggs for the French toast Bennett had specifically requested for their lazy Saturday morning. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting everything gold. From the living room, she could hear Bennett on a video call with his mother, his laughter echoing through the house in a way that still made her heart skip. Their life together had settled into something Grace could never have imagined that night at the Emerald Room. Not perfect. They'd had their share of arguments, misunderstandings, moments where the whirlwind romance crashed into the reality of merging two lives. But even in the messy parts, even in the fights about whose turn it was to do dishes or whether they really needed a third bookshelf, there was love. Constant, steady, unshakable love. Something smells amazing, Bennett said, appearing in the doorway with that smile that still made her knees weak. He crossed the kitchen and wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, kissing her neck. Good morning, Mrs. Sullivan. Good morning, Mr. Sullivan, Grace said, leaning back into him. Your mother says hi. Also, she's insisting we visit for Thanksgiving and won't take no for an answer. My mother is a force of nature. We should probably just surrender now. Grace laughed, flipping the French toast. Your sister also texted. She wants to know if we're coming to her gallery opening next month. Of course we are. Wouldn't miss it. Bennett stole a piece of strawberry from the cutting board. Oh, And I have news. Something in his tone made Grace turn around. Good news or bad news? Depends on your perspective. Bennett's eyes were twinkling. Remember how I've been thinking about stepping back from Sullivan Tech? Bringing in a new CEO so I could focus more on the development side instead of all the business meetings and corporate politics? Yes, Grace said cautiously. I did it. Officially announced my transition yesterday. Marcus is taking over as CEO effective next month. Grace's eyes widened. Bennett, that's huge. How do you feel? Terrified, relieved, excited. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she'd come to know well. The company will be fine. Marcus is brilliant, but it means I'll have more time. More time for us, for actually living instead of just working. More time to figure out what I want to do next. Grace set down the spatula and took both his hands. What do you want to do next? Bennett's expression turned serious, vulnerable. Honestly, I want to start a family. Not right this second. I know we agreed to wait at least a year. But Grace, when I think about the future, I see a house full of noise and chaos and little humans who have your eyes and your laugh. I see us building something that has nothing to do with money or success and everything to do with love. Tears pricked at Grace's eyes. They'd talked about kids, of course, but always in abstract terms. Hearing Bennett articulate it so clearly, so earnestly, made it real. I want that too, she whispered. So much. Yeah? Hope lit up his face. Yeah, maybe not quite yet, but soon, when the time is right. Bennett kissed her then, deep and sweet, and Grace melted into him like she always did, like she always would. The French toast burned. They ordered takeout for breakfast instead, eating it on their back porch while Grace told Bennett about the book she was writing, a romance novel, ironically enough, inspired by their own unlikely story. He'd encouraged her to quit her unfulfilling job at the marketing firm 3 months ago, told her to pursue her dream of writing. The financial freedom his wealth provided meant she could actually take the risk. How's the writing going? Bennett asked, stealing a piece of her bacon. Good, actually. Really good. My agent thinks we might have interest from publishers soon. Grace still couldn't quite believe she had an agent, that her dream was becoming reality. I'm so proud of you, Bennett said, and the sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. I couldn't have done it without you. Without this, she gestured around them. Without the security to take a chance. Grace. Bennett set down his coffee and took her hand. You would have written that book regardless. Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe you'd have written it in stolen moments between soul-sucking jobs. But you would have done it. Your talent, your determination, that's all you. Still, having a partner who believes in me, who supports my dreams. Bennett, I never knew how much I needed that until I had it. Works both ways. He squeezed her hand. You made me remember there's more to life than quarterly earnings and market share. You made me want to actually live. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, just being together. Grace's phone buzzed, a text from Cassidy. Brunch tomorrow? I have news. Grace smiled. Cassidy's news was usually dramatic and entertaining. She texted back a quick yes. Cass wants to do brunch tomorrow, she told Bennett. The woman is a menace to society, but I love her for giving me you, Bennett said. Tell her we'll be there. The rest of the day unfolded in lazy perfection. They went for a walk in their neighborhood, waving to the elderly couple next door who'd adopted them as surrogate grandchildren. They stopped at the farmer's market where Bennett insisted on buying every single flower Grace so much as glanced at. They came home and spent the afternoon curled on the couch watching terrible horror movies and making fun of the plot holes. As evening fell, Grace found herself in their bedroom, unpacking the last few boxes from their move. In one box, buried under old college textbooks, she found something that made her pause. Her journal from 6 months ago. The one she'd been writing in the night before Cassidy burst into her apartment with news of the blind date. Curious, Grace flipped to that entry. I'm so tired of being lonely. Tired of pretending I'm fine with my life when really I'm just waiting. For what? For who? I don't even know anymore. Maybe real love isn't actually real. Maybe it's just something we tell ourselves exists so we don't feel so pathetic for wanting it. Mom called again today with more advice about putting myself out there. She means well, but God, I'm exhausted. What if I put myself out there and there's nothing out there for me? What if I'm just meant to be alone? Cassidy keeps insisting she has this perfect guy for me, but I don't believe in perfect. I don't even believe in good anymore. I just want... Grace had never finished that sentence. Because that's when Cassidy had arrived, and everything had changed. "What you reading?" Bennett asked from the doorway. Grace looked up. This man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to pray. Just an old journal entry, from the night before we met. "Can I see?" She handed it over, watching as Bennett's eyes scanned the page. His expression softened, turned almost heartbroken. "Grace," he said quietly, "you felt like this?" "I did. For a long time, actually. I'd sort of given up, convinced myself that what I wanted didn't exist." Bennett sat beside her on the bed, pulling her close. "I felt the same way. Different circumstances, but same emptiness. I'd actually told myself I'd probably never get married, that I'd just focus on the company and accept that real connection wasn't in the cards for me. And then? And then you walked into that restaurant, and I felt like I'd been asleep my whole life and finally woke up." He kissed her temple. "You know what the crazy part is? If we'd met at any other time, in any other way, I don't know if it would have worked. But that specific moment, when we were both ready to believe in something impossible, that's when the magic happened." Grace thought about that, about timing and fate and the strange alchemy that turns two lonely people into a family. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Moving so fast? Marrying someone you barely knew?" "Never. Not even for a second." Bennett's answer was immediate, certain. "Do you?" Grace looked around their bedroom, at the photos on the dresser from their wedding day, at Bennett's reading glasses on the nightstand next to her chapstick, at the way their lives had woven together so completely in just 6 months. "Not even a little bit," she said. "Best impulsive decision I ever made." They spent the evening cooking dinner together, a practice they'd developed over the months. Bennett was surprisingly good in the kitchen, despite his claims of being hopeless. Grace suspected he just liked having an excuse to stand close to her, to steal kisses between chopping vegetables. After dinner, they FaceTimed Grace's parents. Her mother still got teary every time she saw them together, marveling at how happy her daughter looked. Her father had fully embraced Bennett as a son, and they spent 20 minutes discussing some obscure historical documentary they'd both watched. Later, lying in bed with Bennett's arms around her, Grace found herself thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The years of loneliness and disappointment. The night Cassidy had burst through her door. The terrifying, exhilarating decision to say yes to a stranger. "What are you thinking about?" Bennett murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Just how different my life is now. 6 months ago, I was convinced I'd never find this. Never find you. 6 months ago, I was sitting in board meetings pretending I gave a damn about profit margins when really I just felt hollow inside." Bennett shifted so he could see her face. "And now look at us. Building a life. Talking about babies. Actually excited to wake up in the morning." "The money didn't hurt, though," Grace teased gently. "I mean, being able to quit my job and write full-time, not having to worry about bills. It's not nothing." "No, it's not nothing," Bennett agreed. "But Grace, I need you to understand something. The money didn't buy us this happiness, it just removed obstacles. Made things easier. But what we have, this connection, this love, that has nothing to do with my bank account." "I know that," Grace said. "But I'm also not going to pretend the financial security doesn't matter. It does. It gives us options, freedom, the ability to take risks we couldn't otherwise take." "That's fair." Bennett was quiet for a moment. "You know what the money actually bought me? Time. Time to step back from running the company every waking hour. Time to be here with you, to actually live our life together. That's what wealth really is. Not the zeros in a bank account, but the time and space to focus on what matters. Grace kissed him softly. You're very wise, Mr. Sullivan. I have an excellent teacher, Mrs. Sullivan. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, safe and secure, and deeply, profoundly happy. 3 years later, the sound of tiny feet thundering across hardwood floors preceded the chaos by approximately 3 seconds. Mommy, Mommy, Noah took my crayon. Did not. She's lying. Grace looked up from her laptop where she'd been answering emails from her publisher about the 4th book in her series. Because yes, she'd become a best-selling romance author, which still felt surreal. 2 toddlers barreled into the home office, her daughter Lily's dark curls bouncing and her son Noah's brown eyes wide with indignation. Okay, Grace said, scooping both children onto her lap. Let's use our words. What happened? The explanation that followed was convoluted and contradictory, but Grace had become an expert at toddler diplomacy. Within minutes, she'd negotiated a ceasefire involving a fair distribution of crayons and a promise of cookies, if they played nicely for the next hour. As the twins ran off, friends again as quickly as they'd become enemies, Bennett appeared in the doorway holding a tray with tea and Grace's favorite cookies. Our children are feral, he announced cheerfully. They're 3. Feral is basically the job description. Grace accepted the tea gratefully. How was your call with Marcus? Good. Company's doing great, doesn't need me at all, which is exactly how I wanted it. Bennett perched on the edge of her desk. How's the book coming? Well. Really well, actually. I think this might be my best one yet. Of course it is. You're brilliant. Grace rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress her smile. You're biased. Absolutely. Doesn't make it less true. A crash from the living room made them both jump. I'll go, Bennett said, already heading for the door. You finish your chapter. Grace watched him go. This man who'd gone from powerful CEO to stay-at-home dad without batting an eye, who'd rearranged his entire life around their family without a single regret, who still looked at her the way he had that first night at the Emerald Room, like she was magic made manifest. Her phone buzzed. Cassidy sending a photo of herself holding a newborn baby. Her daughter, born just last week. She's perfect. Thank you for introducing me to my husband 3 years ago. Best wing woman ever. Grace smiled. After witnessing Grace and Bennett's unlikely romance, Cassidy had finally allowed Grace to set her up with Bennett's best friend from college. They'd been married for 2 years now, and were just as disgustingly happy as Grace and Bennett. She's beautiful, Cass. Can't wait to meet her. Bew, I was cleaning out old boxes and found the notes I made when I was planning to set you up with Bennett. Want to know what I wrote about you? Sure. A photo came through. Cassidy's handwriting on a piece of notebook paper. Grace. Smart, funny, kind, beautiful inside and out. Deserves someone who will see how special she is. Needs someone who will take a chance on real love. And under Bennett's name. Bennett. Successful, generous, lonely in a way money can't fix. Needs someone real. Someone who will love him for himself. Needs someone brave enough to take a leap. I knew you were perfect for each other. I just knew. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. She texted back, You changed my life, Cass. Thank you for believing in something impossible. Not impossible, just unexpected. That's the best kind of love. That night, after the twins were finally asleep, a process that involved 3 stories, 2 glasses of water, and 1 impromptu dance party, Grace and Bennett collapsed on the couch together. Remind me why we thought having kids was a good idea? Bennett groaned dramatically. Because you wanted a house full of noise and chaos, Grace reminded him, snuggling into his side. Right. Past me was an idiot. Past me married a stranger after 1 date. We're both idiots. The best kind of idiots. Bennett kissed the top of her head. You know what I was thinking about today? That journal entry you showed me. The one from the night before we met. About how you didn't believe real love existed anymore. Grace tilted her head to look at him. What about it? I'm so grateful you were wrong, that we were both wrong. Because this, he gestured around their messy, toy-strewn living room. This is real. The most real thing I've ever known. It is, Grace agreed. You know what's funny? I used to think love was supposed to be easy, that if you met the right person, everything would just fall into place perfectly. But that's not how it works, is it? No, Bennett said thoughtfully. Love is choosing each other every day. Even on the hard days. Even when the twins are screaming and the house is a disaster and we're both exhausted, it's showing up. And you do, Grace said, emotion making her voice thick. Every single day, you show up for me, for our family. You're the best partner I could have ever hoped for. Right back at you, Mrs. Sullivan. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from years of really knowing someone. Outside, the Seattle evening was settling into its typical gray, but inside their home everything was warm and bright. Do you ever think about that first night? Grace asked suddenly. About how insane it was? All the time, Bennett admitted. I think about seeing you walk into that restaurant, about kissing you on that dance floor, about asking you to leave with me and being terrified you'd say no. I almost did, say no. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to play it safe. What made you say yes? Grace thought about it. I think I was so tired of playing it safe, tired of letting fear make all my decisions. And something about you made me want to be brave. You made me brave too, Bennett said quietly. Before you, I was just going through the motions. Building a company, making money, but not actually living. You taught me how to be alive. We taught each other, Grace corrected. That's what makes us work. We're better together than we ever were apart. Bennett shifted so he could look at her properly. I love you, Grace. I loved you that first night. I loved you on our wedding day, and I love you more now than I thought was humanly possible. You're my best friend, my partner, my home. I love you too, Grace whispered, tears streaming freely now. So much. Always. They kissed, soft and sweet and full of 3 years' worth of memories and promises and dreams still to come. Later, as they got ready for bed, Grace caught sight of their wedding photo on the dresser. Two people who barely knew each other, taking the biggest leap of faith of their lives. They looked so young, so uncertain, so hopeful. We were babies, she said, picking up the frame. Bennett came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Brave babies, though. The bravest. Grace set the photo down. You know what I realized? The money didn't make us happy. The big house or the successful careers or any of that, it's all nice, but it's not the point. What is the point? Grace turned in his arms. This. Us. Building a life together. Raising our babies. Growing old together. That's the wealth that actually matters. Not what's in a bank account, but what's in our hearts. Bennett's eyes were suspiciously shiny. When did you get so wise? I married well, Grace said with a smile. He teaches me things. Right back at you, my love. Right back at you. As they climbed into bed, Grace thought about the journey that had brought them here, the loneliness and heartbreak that had preceded their meeting, the wild, impulsive decision to trust a stranger, the months and years of building something real and lasting. She thought about Cassidy's meddling and her parents' initial worry, about Bennett's revelation of his wealth and their lightning-fast wedding, about the twins sleeping peacefully down the hall and the 4th book she was writing, and the life they'd built together from scratch. And she thought about that younger version of herself sitting alone in a gray apartment, convinced that real love was a myth. You were so wrong, she whispered to that past Grace. It's real. It's messy and hard, and sometimes you'll want to scream into a pillow. But it's real. And it's worth every single risk. Did you say something? Bennett murmured sleepily. Just thanking the universe, Grace said, curling into him. For what? For everything. For you. For us. For this impossible, beautiful life. Bennett pulled her closer, his arms strong and sure around her. Best honeymoon ever, wasn't it? Grace laughed softly, remembering that surreal first morning when Bennett had proposed. When they'd decided to leap without looking, to trust without proof, to choose love over logic. The best, she agreed. And you know what? The honeymoon never really ended. No, Bennett said, kissing her forehead. It didn't. It just turned into something even better. It turned into forever. As Grace drifted off to sleep in the arms of the man who'd changed everything, she felt grateful for every impulsive decision, every leap of faith, every moment of bravery that had led her here. Because in the end, the true wealth had never been the money or the success or the security, though those things certainly helped. The true wealth was love. Pure, simple, complicated, messy, absolutely perfect love. And that was worth more than all the millions in the world.